Alright, y'all, so at the time of recording this, we are through week one at Wimbledon. In fact, our quarterfinal matchups are now set, and I figured that before we got on to final weekend stuff, I'd get my thoughts out there, give some takeaways from week one at Wimbledon this year. I think it's been a really fun tournament so far. I would probably say of the three majors contested this year, Wimbledon has probably given the most memorable and, closest to great matches as we've had all year on the men's side across the three majors so far. And because of that, I think we are primed for an exciting finish as we get to the business end of the tournament. Which brings me to my first takeaway from week one, and that is contributing to the quality of this tournament so far. I think it's been a pleasant surprise to see a lot of top guys among a grass field where, initially my impressions were we could see a lot of upsets, a lot of dark horses making it through deep. But this year's Wimbledon has seen a lot of those top guys actually play up to their ranking and put in career results at this tournament. We've seen Daniil Medvedev make his first quarterfinal at the tournament, Andrei Rublev doing the same. Tsitsipas, a guy that I had on high upset alert, matched his career best result. Obviously, probably will be disappointed with how the tournament ended, but even for him, put in his first real exceptional performance in, about 6 months since Australia, really. You got the Young Bucks trudging on, Sinner returning to the quarterfinals and looking primed to make his first semi of a major here. Alcaraz and Rune making their first quarterfinals at this tournament, doing so navigating a couple of tricky roadblocks in their march there. And then, of course, Novak Djokovic still marching on, doing what we expect of him, looking to be the final boss for whoever comes out of that top half. All in all, the top guys mostly delivering this fortnight. Now, I say mostly, but I've got to say that my fellow countrymen did not hold it down through the first week, for the most part. It was a super disappointing Wimbledon for, most of the top American guys. Two of my semifinalists went out within the second round, and those were Sebastian Korda and Taylor Fritz. I still think Korda was a popular pick for good reason to, go deep here, even make the semis for a lot of people. The risk in picking him, obviously, was just how short on match play he was. He looked really good in Queens, but that was pretty much all you'd got in the last 6 months since the Australian Open. Make matters worse, he drew Yuri Vesely, who is no stranger to, making big upsets, even just at Wimbledon. He's upset Thiem in 2018, Zverev in 2019, and I knew Vesely would be a tough out, but that result was a whole lot more one-sided and tame from Korda, quite frankly, than I would have expected even in a loss. Perhaps talking the big game of saying I'm one of the favorites for Wimbledon, painted a target on his back, or, put unnecessary pressure on his own shoulders. I don't know, but obviously rough go of it for him. He wasn't alone. Taylor Fritz, even though Taylor was coming in with, a rough go of it at majors, I really felt that getting through that Yannick Hanfmann match could be one that could absolve him of some of those early round demons that he struggled with lately in majors. He rallied from 2-1 down, and second day of that match after it was suspended for darkness, he really put in a workmanlike performance, got to the finish line super convincingly. Hanfmann being one of the toughest unseeded guys he could have drawn first round, I thought that really could have been one that could free him up, but little did I know, an even bigger collapse was on the horizon. 2 sets and a break against Mikael Ymer. Ymer's a talented guy and put in a good effort, I think, in Eastbourne the week before, but that's just an inexcusable loss, and the funk in majors for Fritz continues since making the quarters here last year. As the comeback began to snowball on him, I do think that, mentally weighed on him. He seemed to just be playing not to lose at the end of that match, just rolling balls over. And moving forward, it probably is going to be something that continues to weigh on him as a mental hurdle. which I definitely didn't see coming last year after he put in, good performances in Australia and Wimbledon. But also Francis Tiafoe, I had him going to the quarterfinals. I thought that third round with Dimitrov very well could decide who ended up going to the quarter. Obviously now in hindsight, that was incorrect. But after that performance where Francis was uncharacteristically, lackadaisical and, lacking fight a bit, I think it's safe to say it's been a disappointing slam season for him thus far. Certainly entertained the possibility of him losing to Dimitrov, but I had that match as like a coin flip, and it wasn't even close. But the one guy carrying the torch is Christopher Eubanks. What he has done this Wimbledon has been utterly remarkable. First main draw in this tournament. It's the biggest stage arguably in the entire tennis world, and he goes to the quarterfinals. And his run is still going. A chance now against Medvedev to make the semis. And it's been absolutely electric, on the court, phenomenal run, beating Norrie, Tsitsipas now in 5, and he's been doing it, just clobbering the ball off the serve, off the ground, particularly the one-hander went nuclear today in the 5th, but also off court, it's been awesome getting to know the guy better. I feel like Wimbledon's really embraced him, put their arms around him. ESPN guys on that cast have always been telling us what a likable guy he is, and he definitely through the pressers and interviews seems like an absolute gem of a human, so can't help but be really happy for him. But speaking of another guy who's really happy for this tournament, Matteo Berrettini. If you watched my preview and predictions for this tennis season at the end of last year, I predicted a Berrettini return to the top 10. It seems more likely than not that's not going to happen, but that's largely been on account of, just a very injury-plagued season again this year, and when he's been on court, he's looked as vulnerable as I can remember, pre-2019, really. And this year, heading into Wimbledon, not much to build off of. Left the court in tears in his one tune-up action in Stuttgart when he got dismantled by Sonego. But much like, we saw last year when also he was short on matches after Australia till the grass season, obviously he was able to turn it on in a flash and win 2 titles in Stuttgart and then Queens heading into Wimbledon. Seemed like he was one of the favorites coming off the finals in 2021 again. And, of course, incurred some really terrible luck with a positive COVID test ahead of the tournament. This year was a bit of the flip side where, coming into Wimbledon, the preparation was very unideal. But this year it was at the big one where Berrettini really stepped it up, really flipped his performance on a dime, dropped his first set of the tournament against Sonego, and then proceeded to win his next 10 sets. And through those 3 matches that he won against Sonego, de Minaur, and Zverev, all who are very formidable opponents to get in the first, second, and third round, he was never broken. In fact, he hardly faced break points against those guys. And really, for the first time since grass season last year, he resembled the player that certainly I had returning to the top 10, but, the player that a lot of us, can admire for the fact that he's such a great competitor. Obviously, the forehand, the big serve, those were breathtaking through those wins. But I feel like the novelty with Berrettini really has been the reliability in beating guys that you expect him to beat. At majors, he almost never loses to people that you would say he should beat. And even when he's run up against those guys like Djokovic, Nadal, Alcaraz today, where, their variety and all-around game just has him a bit overmatched, he's always competed so admirably and almost never leaves you, with a bad taste in your mouth in these losses that he takes. And I think that a lot of people that, perhaps even have more all-around game than Matteo Berrettini, they could do with competing the way Matteo Berrettini does. So it is great to see him back where he belongs, and I certainly hope he can keep this going. But switching gears, a guy whose Wimbledon campaign, really made me feel bad was Andy Murray's. He played an absolutely tremendous match, perhaps the match of the tournament to this point against Stefanos Tsitsipas. Super high quality for over 4 hours and 5 sets. Great level from both, and that's what makes it all the more gutting for Murray, because had he been able to get over the line in that Tsitsipas match in the second round, his level was definitely there with a very workable draw to make it deep, potentially quarters, maybe even semis. Just so unlucky for him to, face probably Tsitsipas' best grass court performance ever by far, and easily Stefanos' best performance in general since Australia. And I think there's a case to be made, his best performance since that match against Novak that he lost in Paris-Bercy at the end of last year. The dude had an absolutely beastly forehand performance throughout the course of this match, and, in spite of how high a level Tsitsipas executed at, Murray, after one day where they got suspended due to curfew, led 2-1, having withstood the barrage. And even the next day when they continued, had several half chances to get this one done in 4. This really seemed like one of those moments for Murray with the British crowd and, a doable draw ahead of him to potentially have one of those blasts from the past, Connor's 1991 US Open type runs, but just not meant to be in, really heartbreaking fashion. And for him to still be hanging around here with a metal hip, the thought process has to be on some level. There's only so much solace I can take in these moral losses per se, which is something that he alluded to in his presser after the match, where he seemed absolutely devastated. There is the silver lining that, at this rate he should be seeded by the US Open, potentially not have to get the big guns out of the gates so early, but there's no doubt this one is going to sting. But another takeaway I wanted to point out in this tournament was it seems like the kids are growing up before our very eyes. Obviously the kids being Carlos Alcaraz, Holger Rune, and Jannik Sinner. I think all three to varying degrees. With Sinner, it's tough to gauge with the draw opening up so nicely for him. I think, even before Fritz lost, the expectation for most was Sinner to make the semifinals. And I think with how efficient he's been, not getting caught up in any unnecessary battles or expending any unnecessary energy against guys you expect him to beat convincingly, that is very encouraging. Obviously also coming off a bit of a rough stretch in his season so far, going back to Rome. Though not at his best at certain points in this tournament, I still think, navigating his way to the semis, in all likelihood making his first semifinal, that's a step forward. Obviously, the main gauge for the success of his tournament will be how he performs against probably Djokovic in the semifinals, but still a positive tournament for sure for Jannik. For Holger Rune, I think I really undersold his chances at making this quarterfinal. I did feel he had a good draw to make it to the second week, but as mentioned earlier, I was looking more to Dimitrov versus Tiafoe to decide who makes it to the quarter there. But at Wimbledon, we've seen Holger, after an easy first couple rounds, continue to expand on his clutch reputation. After blowing that deciding set tiebreak in Australia against Rublev, Holger has just been money when the chips have been down this year. The 5 match point saves to win Munich, deciding set breaker win against Cerundolo in Paris, and now here, he was in a hole a couple of times against Davidovich Fokina, who has proven, how talented he is. He can be a formidable roadblock for these top guys. And obviously, Holger saving a 15-40 at 4-5, 2 match points down, and then 6-2 and 8-5 in the deciding set tiebreak. He's just had ice in the veins, and then again today against Dimitrov, down a set and a break at 4-3, 30 love, I believe, in the second. And even in that second set tiebreaker, being 2 points away from going down 2 sets to love, he was able to turn it around And with that match being as close as it was, I really think that it was Holger's, killer instinct and mental edge over Grigor that made that difference. And additionally, I don't know if it's because it's grass and points are less physical, or Rune has truly taken a step forward as far as endurance is concerned. But I have seen him get fatigued recently with less wear and tear than what he's, incurred this tournament so far. So all in all, super successful tournament for Holger Rune already, continuing a fabulous stretch for him since the clay season began. And then as for his quarterfinal opponent in Carlos Alcaraz, I've already expressed, a lot of the technical things that impressed me so much before this tournament even began, and how much more comfortable Alcaraz was looking on grass in Queens. And a lot of that has carried over into Wimbledon. This court rewarding a lot of the variety he brings to the table. And on top of that, he has competed remarkably well against some stern tests. Yari redlined for much of their third round match. And also Berrettini, who, we all know his pedigree on the surface, showed his class in the opening set. And both times, Alcaraz took both those guys' biggest punch and returned it with interest. Particularly this Berrettini match, I think that was his best of the tournament so far, particularly off the return. I've only ever seen Nadal and Djokovic, seem to neutralize the Berrettini serve. And Alcaraz pretty much did that as well as you can on this surface. I believe Matteo only won 67% of his first serve points. And from the second set on, Alcaraz just had such a clean read on the serve. It seemed like he pretty much rendered Matteo helpless out there, and against a good version of Berrettini, I've only really seen Nadal, Djokovic, Federer do that, at least over the course of best of 5. So it's just a continuation of this Alcaraz transition to grass going seamlessly this year, I think. And I'm really excited to see Holger and Carlos go head to head. Difficult to get a read on that matchup, how it'll go, There are two matchups. One was at the Next Gen Finals, which you can pretty much write off. First of all, with them being so young at the time. Second of all, the format being completely different there. And then the only other time last year in Bercy when Alcaraz pulled out in the second set tiebreaker. But I do got a hunch that, that matchup could play out in the same way, just considering how close peers they are, how close they are in age. They know each other well. There's a good shot that, like the Sinner-Alcaraz matchup, that even though no one of Carlos's generation, is really even close to him in terms of how they match up against the field, when it comes to playing one another, that certainly could be a whole lot closer than them relative to the field. But I'm leaning Alcaraz in a tight 4. But nonetheless, as I said at the beginning of this video, the final boss remains Novak Djokovic. He's still looking on course for number 24 here. No secret that coming in, he was the heavy favorite to lift the title. Nothing's really changed regarding that. In fact, I think in comparison to prior editions where he's won this recently, he hasn't taken nearly as much time to ease into the tournament. In fact, I think really from the jump, he's been pretty sharp. The only real hint of vulnerability or shakiness was really today out of the gates in the resumption of his fourth round against Hubie Hurkacz, particularly just the third set. But obviously, again, once he's dealt with some adversity, the game just tidies up. He locks down, and sooner or later, it's game, set, match Djokovic. And honestly, with the way that Hubie served on this surface, I think that there's a pretty good shot that Djokovic probably faced his toughest test pre-final. And really, there's only one scenario where I could entertain the possibility of Djokovic not lifting this title, and that would be Alcaraz fast-tracking, figuring out Wimbledon. I've said he's learning the surface really quickly, but, that also entails dealing with the occasion, playing Djokovic in a final, potentially at Wimbledon. all that type of Django, and even that is not a guaranteed win, obviously. He can put his best foot forward, and I truly think it would surprise a lot of people how competitive it could be, but under any circumstance, it's just hard to bet against him here. Novak seems dialed in and on course for number 24. But that's all I got for this video. Should be some great action ahead in week 2 as we get to the home stretch of this tournament. Feel free to leave your thoughts on, my takeaways in the comment section below. Also, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help the video perform a lot better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see y'all in the next one.